action, so you can get into a point where you're actually getting experience. I think is a premium value, and something that I think is really important to over index on early. And then as you get that experience, then you can over index on cash later. Is how I think about it.
This is the Yield Coach Show, episode 47. Hey everybody, this is your coach Ian Brown. A few announcements. Yield Coach Capital has opened its doors to investors looking to multiply their money while working with yours truly and our varsity investment team. We recently closed our 170-acre Gainesville, Florida industrial tract, and our limited partner investors are on pace to make 2.5 times or more on their money. That opportunity is gone, but don't miss the next one. Be sure to join our investor list and never miss a deal again. You can join our investor list by the portal, which is in the show notes of this podcast. It's in our Instagram bio link, and you can also do it at yield-coach.com. If you join our investor list, we will get you the free gift, 107 questions to ask a deal sponsor, and a discount to our Employee to Entrepreneur video course, which is packed full of information and case studies to kickstart your investment success. Now is your time to take the field. I'm your host, Ian Brown. Every episode, we bring you dynamic entrepreneurs, real estate investors, thought leaders, and inspirational guests ready to open up, share their story, the good, the bad, the ugly, so you can learn lessons, gain advantages, and accelerate your success. Very excited to have Mr. Johnny Wolff on the show today. Killer name, but in addition to that, he is the CEO and founder of HomeRoom, fast-growing real estate investing platform. A little on his story, he had an unusually terrible Craigslist roommate back in 2017, and he converted a single-family home to a group home for his friends, realized the massive untapped potential for multi-tenant co-living real estate, and his company HomeRoom was born. HomeRoom now houses thousands of residents in hundreds of cities, and hundreds of homes across over 30 cities, and they're on a tremendous growth pattern. Can't wait to hear more about this. Johnny, welcome to the show.
And thank you so much for having me. Big fan of your show. I really love the name, Yield Coach. Super cool.
We're doing what we can. You know, I think having guys on like you, we're gonna jump into some topics that are a little bit like alternative, I would think, and but also attainable, especially through your company. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to jumping into this. How did you get into this unique sector of, co-living? I mean, I know there's the Craigslist anecdote, but let's unpack that a little bit, learn a little bit more about you and the kind of the genesis.
Yeah. So I started my career in the Bay Area, which is a great place to start your career. Just not a great place to live alone because no one can afford to do that. Even if you're making, $300,000, it's kind of difficult. So I had roommates for a number of years, and I was also doing remote real estate investing, starting in 2008, like in Midland, Texas. So I was investing in real estate, and I was living with roommates, and basically for 7 or 8 years. Moved to Austin in 2015 to invest more aggressively in real estate. Um, and I decided to combine those two concepts: real estate investing and living with roommates. So I bought a number of properties. I rented out each property by the room. I wanted to buy properties that were sort of the edge of like the where Austin was cool. You could tell that it was like going outwards because it was growing. And like at a certain point, if you went far enough out, it was just a little cheaper. You're like, why does it drop $100,000 like at this block and not this block? So I was buying right on the edge of that kind of growth. But it was still too expensive to yield as a single family home. So I rented out by the room to kind of create yield in these slightly nicer areas. And that worked out really, really well. I got the yield, the appreciation kind of caught up to those neighborhoods. And I turned, a few tens of thousands into like hundreds of thousands pretty quickly. And my friends were pretty jealous of how I'd invested, and so they asked me to do it for them. So I started a company essentially to help people buy properties, slightly nicer areas than most turnkey providers would do, and rent out each room separately. And so that's where we are today, across a number of markets in the Midwest and South. We help investors make 50% more rent on average, and by renting out each room separately in their homes.
It's interesting. I think some of the best ideas are straightforward and simple. not that I don't really actually quote Warren Buffett very often, but if you don't understand it, don't invest in it. And what you're talking about, I think really like it rings the common sense bell. You take the pie, you chop it up into smaller pieces. In this case, it's a home being chopped into bedrooms, and I don't mean literally chop, but just your the rights for the occupants. And it kind of reminds me of, I did this. We didn't really call it co-living, but I had randomly assigned roommates in college in an apartment complex. It wasn't even technically student housing, and they would just rent it by the bedroom. Every bedroom did have a bathroom. I could see that not being a requirement. Ours did. And instead of having a deadbolt only on the front door, there were some locks on the interior doors. And we shared a kitchen, and we shared laundry, and we and we shared a television. Nowadays, I'm not going to age myself, but back then we didn't all have TVs in our rooms, but we shared a television. And I think it sounds like it wouldn't work, but man, I didn't even know these guys. I mean, some of us we're still friends now. So, one thing I'm kind of getting at here is like on the common sense side, yes, you break it up, you make more per room than you would by like by the pound. Does this work? I mean, you were in Austin. That's a pretty cool, funky market. I've only visited there. I'm in a not so cool. I mean, I like Jacksonville, Florida, but it's not, I won't say it's nearly as cool and funky and edgy as Austin. Do you think this
Sure.
can work in most markets, or where are there markets you like to pursue where you might have like the profile of person that would be interested in co-living?
Yeah, one of the things we found is that it's in a lot more cities than sort of folks would naturally believe or expect. I was living in San Francisco with roommates. Everyone does it there because an apartment, is like 3 grand to live alone. Um, and then I moved to Austin, and a lot of people were doing it there. And then I moved to Kansas City, and that's where I started HomeRoom, and a lot of people were doing it there. So I think if you live in sort of like San Francisco, you think, of course, but why would anyone do it in Kansas City? And the truth is, you know, saving 50% on rent appeals to people in every city in the United States. So that's one of the cool discoveries we made. And it was, it was a little bit lucky because I just kind of was moving to chase where I thought the best place to invest is in real estate would be, which is Austin and then Kansas City. And then I just happened to kind of reapply this rent by the room model there, and it continued to work. So that's Kansas City is actually where we launched the market. We have a number of homes in Shawnee, Kansas, or not Shawnee, sorry. We have in Olathe, Kansas, which is like 50 minutes outside of the downtown Kansas City area. So it works in a lot more places than you'd think. There are areas that it does not work. It would definitely work in Jacksonville. Some areas that it won't work are areas in which there's not any net migration and people don't move very much, right? So if it's a really small city and no one from any other cities move to that city very often, it gets really difficult to do. And so we've discovered that with a few cities and towns. But I would say, uh, by and large, we're surprised how consistently it works in cities that most people wouldn't expect it to.
I definitely follow you on that net migration, and you're talking about the expense, the 3,000 to live by yourself in San Francisco. I have a brother-in-law up in, well, he's most recently been in New York, and I feel like nobody up there, at least in his demographic, is living on their own. Now these guys are, I call them pre-family. Do you tend to find people? I mean, it seems to me, maybe I'm naive. It seems to me like you're going to have more of like your young professional, maybe service worker, whatever it is. I'm sure the demographics pretty varied, but I would think pre-family, maybe post-family. But how does that play out?
Yeah, you're spot on there. It's the average age is 28 at homeroom, so we generally tend to weigh towards college students. We just that there's definitely a niche for college student housing. It's a different niche though, and you have to like do different things, and because it's more destructive, but you also there's the benefits and plus and minuses. With co-living, it's longer stays, and you're dealing with kind of adults, which is really what we specialize in. Um, we do have people in their 50s, 60s. Everyone's welcome in homerooms. We do want to make sure people understand that typically folks' roommates are going to be in their 20s, so you have to be comfortable with that. Um, so yeah, it's pretty varied. I think our oldest homeroom member, I think, is 66 right now, and the youngest is 18. So it's all over the board.
Interesting. So, what is an ideal property for homeroom? Like it's right in your box. What would you be looking for and why?
Yeah, what's it's right into the box is a few things. We HOA neighborhoods are not friendly to roommate housing, so I would avoid those like the plague. And for a roommate house, for a co-living property, we want to have two bathrooms with showers and two full baths because you're going to want to share the showers, and that can become a challenge if you have, let's say, four, five, six roommates. We're generally looking for we want to have a dining room and a living room, and then we're going to turn all the rest of the spaces into bedrooms. We're going to, get them permitted, all that stuff. It's going to be legal, compliant. Um, but yeah, it's really about finding a property that's at a low enough price point, like any real estate investment, because if the price goes up, the yield goes down. And then it's going to have the way that the property is going to be laid out will allow it to become a 5 or 6 bedroom home, because that's really where you make your hay in co-living is getting a few more bedrooms than you already have most of the time.
I don't know if you've ever run into this, but and it could have changed since I was in Tallahassee when I was at Florida State, but they had some ordinance. Someone will probably message me and fact check me on this, but I think at 4 or 5 bedrooms legally, of course, you could have like somebody sleeping in like a sun porch, but legally, I think you were like capped. I want to say like at 4, and let's say it was 5 just for this conversation. But do you run into markets where they try to restrict you on like a bedroom count? Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's definitely something that is fairly widespread. That it's called, it's the zoning of what a family is really, right? So in most cities, not all of them, there are cities that do not have this. There's a Round Rock and Pflugerville north of Austin. They actually do not have, they follow the state law, which is 2 people per bedroom. And there's no other regulation on it. But a lot of cities have something where they say that a family can't be unrelated. They have to be related by blood. So a foster kid would. And so we think, we have like a legal team that's working on this. We don't believe these laws are really just, but we have to like pay attention to them. A lot of times we'll have dialogues with cities proactively about our use case, but it is something we're navigating. We would say that some small fraction of these homes will have city interactions and we'll be able to untangle them, and some fraction we will not be able to. So that ends up being one of the challenges with this model. It's a little less challenging than short-term rentals. The challenge with short-term rentals is the city can just nuke the entire concept at one, but we have yet to see a city that is willing to say unrelated occupants cannot live together at all. And so really it's sort of like in that margin in between that we're having discussions.
Mm-hmm.
An argument to them is saying we're trying to provide affordable housing, and when you have a few more people, you get more affordable housing, which is exactly what you spend all your time in city council talking about. And they say, well, and so we do it really well. We think about parking. We make sure the exterior yard care, so it's the nicest home on the block. We do all these things. And so when we've encountered some cities, Fort Worth specifically, we talked it through with them, right? And we were able to continue moving forward. So it's something that it's a long-term thing that we're building our strategy there, but a few of our homes have issues like that, where the cities say you're over the limit and we're gonna have to pull you back from, let's say you have 6 rooms, we're gonna have to pull you back to 5 or 4, and we'll do that.
And so in those circumstances, like where I am, I sit on the planning commission. I've been hearing applications for 4 years. We do have like a group home designation, but I wouldn't think that's where you're even trying to go. You don't offer any rehabilitation. You're not transitional. So, but do you have to sometimes go before local planning and development boards and agencies to try to rezone or get variances or administrative relief for some of these properties?
Yeah, we don't, it doesn't typically get to that because these sort of code enforcements are really like by report only, right? It has to
Mm-hmm.
be a neighbor report. It's you on the zoning, like you're not gonna there's too many houses, right, to cover. So what we do is we have kind of a playbook. If like a neighbor reports, we'll talk to the neighbor, and then we'll talk to the city and say, hey, this is an unrelated family. Here's kind of our legal argument to that. Here's how other cities have allowed us to do this. And if there's any things that you need us to do differently to make sure that this can continue as it is, let us know, right? We have video doorbells outside to make sure that the front yard looks nice, that parking's done well. Because in reality, most of these kind of, zoning laws are because unrelated occupants are seen to behave less well than related occupants. And so what we're doing is just saying, hey, actually, we think we're as good or better. And so let's rethink about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that typically it works more often than not.
And I do agree with you for the most part, in most parts of the country, anyways, especially on the code side. It's going to be complaint driven. So if you're a good neighbor and you don't have complaints, you're unlikely to have that phone ringing. So sometimes you can just, stay under the radar. We routinely get applications before planning commission where someone's been in violation for like decades. They either did or
Sure.
didn't know it, or they say they didn't know it. That honestly, sometimes that doesn't really matter. You can't always prove it. But usually, what gets them is they're trying to change their property, or they've picked up a new neighbor, or they've managed to irritate a neighbor, and so that kind of rings the bell. All right, but
Sure.
kind of pivoting off of that. Let's. I'm just thinking through. So I do have at the moment 7 Airbnbs. Well, short-term rentals. They're not all technically Airbnb. Some are medium term, which is we try to do 6 months or more. In the state of Florida, there's no short-term taxes if you go 6 months or more. A lot of states have something similar. What I'm getting at is what type of duration and term is somebody looking for? Like if they're going to rent at HomeRoom, and what's their commitment?
Yeah, in terms of the tenants, we do a minimum of 3 months, but the average stay has typically been between 1 and 2 years. So
Okay.
we don't do the month, we don't do the daily stay. It's not That's not what it's set up to be. It's meant to be a longer term place. We actually just had one of our tenants we that moved in May of 2019. She just moved to buy her own house. So she's been there for 4 years. So it's they're longer term, and as long as they, it's as long as their roommates are good and we do our part, then people tend to stay quite a bit longer than the typical medium stay rental would be.
So you'll sign them on at 90. And if this is too in the weeds, just say
Oh
Brown
no, go for it.
pivot. But, at 90, I'm just curious. You've got a blended house. And so if somebody comes and goes, if this were in Florida, if somebody comes and goes under 6 months, under 180 days, that would trigger transient
Short term.
tax, state and local, which is a little bit of a,
Mm,
let's be honest, a little bit of a bitch to even calculate remit. You got DOR
mm.
and you've got local jurisdictional taxes. It's just, and your accounting fees. So, I'm just kind of curious. Do you ever try for 6 months or more? Are you in jurisdictions where you don't? It doesn't seem to matter. Like it's a
We
narrow
can, I
question.
mean, yeah, I mean, the truth is like we can easily offer 6 months or more. We're aware of the limits. Most of the cities we're in, it's 30 days, right? And we're not close to that.
Okay.
And if we have any kind of converse, it's sort of, there's some enforcement of ability as well, right? Once again, like these homes are, the cities don't, they'll have conversation with us sometimes, but it's not something that, brings a lot of it. We don't get a lot of attention. So we'll pretty much do 3 months minimum, but usually people are signing for a year. That's the most typical lease signing. And if we need to say, hey, we can't do 3 months for interns, then we just turn that off and switch it to 6 months. It's not a big deal.
Another thing that there's probably more for the audience than you, but we'll draft 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever it is, and have some kind of a breakup clause in there with a very reasonable liquidated damages. I guess theoretically you could have none, but there might be some enforceability issue there technically. But that is another way through it. So it's like, okay, Susie, you say you want to do 90. That's our minimum. We want you to commit to 6 months, but after 90 days, the penalty is, $20 to break up or something. And that would be,
Interesting.
it's just another. I have a lot of, I'm in Florida, we have a lot of scrutiny, very high short-term rental revenue, a lot of positive
Mm,
migration, and I'm on the coast. So I hear about this stuff all the time. And that is a common way to attempt to it's a circumvention of sorts, but I think as I speak through it right now, I do tend to think if it's drafted properly, it is legal. And if it's done with the right intent, it'd be legal. But I've definitely done it
yeah.
on a 12-month with a walk away, very small liquidated damages fee after 6 months. Um, and so that's just an idea there. But you could
Yeah,
do the
that's
same
interesting.
thing. Yeah, you bounce that off your legal depending on what part of the country you're in. In the
Yeah, that's clever,
same
man. A lot of these kind of issues where, the regulation, of all these newer kind of investment property types, it lags so far. You're like, we probably need to have like a reasonable conversation and like look at this, but like, people need affordable housing now. And so the question is like, do you wait for the conversation? I mean, how do you even make the conversation happen if you're not pushing the envelope and pushing that to happen? So I think doing things like what you're describing is the way to go. And eventually the conversation happens about, how do you do this in a way um, that's not quite it requires so much creativity, right? And
Hmm.
how do we make this work for everybody? So yeah, I like
Well,
that idea. That's cool. Oh,
yeah, and the good operators make it to where sometimes it just gets pulled off the books. It's no longer in the code because if everyone's
sure.
a great short-term rental operator and there's no party houses pissing off all the neighbors or your group, I shouldn't be calling them group homes. I said that, but your co-living homes aren't making anyone upset. They're well manicured, they're well parked. You're not blocking everybody. You're not noisy. Yeah, I mean, it just could be a non-issue that never even becomes a tall blade of grass, and then maybe people revisit the fact that there's even something on the books about it. All right,
Yeah,
so
that's really our goal over
yeah.
the long term is for that to happen.
I probably got a little bit ahead of myself. Can you take us through? So your company, Homeroom, you're buying and maybe doing light renovation or heavy, placing tenants, occupants, and then selling the asset?
No, we never hold the asset. We'll sort of we we'll get an investor. We'll say, hey, generally to invest with homeroom, you're going to need 100 grand because down payment for the home, and then the rehab, and then the retrofitting and furnishing. And once an investor's like, I like conceptually what you're going to do, and we'll help them pick a market. One of the things we did at homeroom early is try to have multiple markets so that we're not trying to like, we're trying to give people choice as well as like identify what their needs are. What are you looking for in your investment? In my case, when I started investing aggressively in Austin, I was 32 and I really wanted to get my net worth to go from like nothing to like something. And so I was looking for appreciation, right? And so some investors are in that looking for that. Others are looking for like a very stable down the middle cash flow home. We find that you can do that. It's hard to do. Certain markets just don't give people what they want. So having multiple markets will help them pick the right market. And then we have an underwriting team that's kind of pulling every home that hits the MLS every day. And we'll say, hey, you said you want cash flow. We have Indy, we have Atlanta. Those are kind of the ones and Kansas City. Those are the ones we recommend. Here's like a home that arrived in this city that's going to hit your cash flow targets. And then they would buy it we have a partner agent in the market. And then our team would retrofit it, um, and do all the work and furnish it and get it set up and then lease it to roommates. So we're kind of like your managed service provider throughout the whole process, but we won't buy and set up the home and then sell it to you.
Okay. So the actual client, the owner, they're going to end up being the one funding the purchase with your recommended agent doing your recommended changes, and you will be the guide and I guess hands on getting it leased up. Would it be like your own team doing the capex or the renovation work?
Yeah, we have a central team. Like they've done, I think the team's done 10, they've kind of been overseeing of 10,000 rehabs of one of them was a construction manager at mine for a while. So they're essentially leading, and then we have select partners that are doing the actual work, and that usually it's the same partner in each market. So it is our team and it is our network doing the work.
Great. And then so when it's all said and done, they own the property, you've set it up, it's renovated, they've used your people, and I can't imagine there's a guarantee, but I'm sure there's you're there for them, and they can hit the
Yeah,
projections. So you
yeah,
mentioned,
we're
yeah.
doing our best to underwrite. Just kind of like short term rentals, right? It's your single family rental. There's like a million points of data on what this property will rent for, and usually you're going to be within like 5% or 3% or something. With short term rentals and with co living, the range varies a lot. We have homes that, as a single family home, it was renting for $1,500, and then we just hit the jackpot, and now it's renting for 3,200 with co living. We have others that like do moderately better. So that's part of when you're doing one of these models that is innovating and doing things kind of like cutting edge, you can get much bigger rewards, but it also has a little bit more variability.
Mm-hmm. I can totally attest to that. And
Yeah.
so I house hack. So I got a corner house and it's perfect for side access. And we fenced it in a way where we'll call it the Airbnb guest, but either way, the short-term guest comes in. I never see him, but that little 180 square foot studio, some months pays for the whole damn house I live in. Other months it's a little bit, but it has seasonality. It has
Mm.
Monday through Sunday fluctuation. Now on the aggregate, it's actually pretty reliable and predictable. But when you like compare that to just a traditional 12-month rental, unfurnished, the guy's got his own utilities, his own furniture, white walls, go. You can kind of set your watch by that. Well, maybe not with all the eviction issues during COVID, but generally those are pretty easy. But I will say,
Easy.
you talk about the upside, 3,200 versus 1,500.
Yeah.
In my example, I don't even know that there's a market to rent a 180 square foot studio in my city for. I cringe to think how $500-600, and I don't mean I don't even know who would want to live down there long term. It's just too small. It's like a hotel room. But people will pay $99 a night or more. 15 to 20 plus nights a month, and all of a sudden you've got a property that I probably could not place a tenant in that might do $2,600 a month to 180 square feet. It costs like 15 grand to build out. It was storage. So I mean, that's an anecdote. I'm living it. And now wherever I go, I'm like, I want a small, cool, creative space because as you know, whether it's a short-term tenant or a long-term tenant, they're not going in with a laser and grid paper, measuring your square footage and like calculating how much they're paying per month per square foot. Is it cool?
Sure.
Is it comfortable? Do I like the location? How far away from work? How far away from the grocery store? How far away from the bars and whatever? So depending on their lifestyle, that's what people I've learned. Like it's been 17 years for me, but I've come to the conclusion people don't really care about square footage. They really care about layout, functionality, location, price. And I think that's where you and I are speaking the same language. I see it big time in my
Mm.
short-term rentals. Nobody really cares what the square footage is if it's laid out
Mm.
and in a good spot.
Yeah. I mean, we see the same thing, and we kind of look at each bedroom as its own individual unit, right? And so there can be 100 square foot room, which is, that's fine. It's, there's some limitations on a 100 square foot room. If you have a big bed, you maybe couldn't fit a desk in. But what we have found is that the dimensions of a room matter a lot more, right? So if you have a 10 by 10 room, that's the most ideal with like a closet that's sizable. But if you had let's say 7 by 13 or 7 by 14 room, suddenly it's not as interesting to any tenant because like, maybe your bed is taking up the entire width of the bedroom and you can't fit anything else in the room. So we found that like square footage itself is not nearly as important as like you have to have at least this much width, right, in a room in each side. The width and height need to be a certain dimension, otherwise the room's going to be marked down substantially. And so that's something that we've seen obviously at a room level, and you're talking and kind of like what you're talking about.
What type of, you did give us one example, and I know there's many, many, many examples, but what would be a typical premium going from a single family dwelling to your co-living scenario? Revenue premium.
Across the portfolio, we see 35% more. There's variability, like I said before, but yeah, so 35% more rent is kind of what we're going for. We're usually going to try to get 50% during the underwriting process. Um, and then it will kind of land, it'll kind of range in each direction once it's kind of up and running.
All right. I'm sure people are thinking this. All right. I would think they are because I'm going back to my college memories. I feel pretty lucky. We all got along in that scenario that I mentioned a few minutes ago. We did have one weird guy that just like locked himself in his room. And we like never saw him. And it was fine, I guess. He like bought his own microwave and his own like bigger than a mini fridge, like kind of a big fridge, rolled it into his room, and he just like stayed in there. What I'm getting at is how, on average, are these people doing like getting along? how is that managing like I'd call it like the human and social side of it? And then how are you like in the placing of these people, kind of how are you dealing with that and managing that?
Yeah, that's definitely an aspect, right? And that, with our property management, or with our kind of like, we're a master tenant, but like with our master tenancy, it's definitely different. That is something that we have. Like, it's interesting that roommates in our scenarios, like they're an amenity essentially. Like if we, when we think about it, like if you have a house with really good roommates, if you're the future tenants, like, oh, I'll pay a little bit more. I mean, I maybe I'll get a friend out of that, which is like kind of invaluable actually. And then really terrible roommates, I guess the guy that you're talking about is kind of like probably a negative, but not that much of a negative. And then you've got like really negative roommates who are doing things like being messy, being loud, being inconsiderate. So, we deal with that all the time. But not as much as you'd think, right? A lot of roommates become good friends. A lot of roommates have issues, but we are able to kind of help them sort through it. We have a counselor on retainer if we need to bring them in if things get really bad. But mostly it's enforcement of kind of like the roommate agreement. Um, we have some fines that are available if things get out of hand. So it's just a bunch of checks and balances. And then we also have, because we'll have multiple homes within a city, if there's just it's like both of these folks are, good personalities to be in at homeroom, but they're not getting along personally, we can move someone to a different home. So there's definitely some interesting challenges that you encounter in this situation that you will not encounter in any other property management. We had someone put think a gay pride flag in their front yard yesterday, just as an example, and then another roommate did not like it, and we're like, you're just gonna like, and we had never encountered that specific issue, and it sounds delicate, so but our team handled it really well, right? It ended up being something that both sides ended up being okay with, but yeah, we do spend some time mediating and taking complaints about roommates.
I would imagine so. But it sounds like it's probably it a lot of people are like, "Oh, Ian with your 7 short-term rentals. That must be like a huge pain in the ass." Setting those up and not just the physical asset, but the procedures and the rules and typing up everything within the different platforms, Verbo, Booking, Airbnb, your own website, all that. Yeah, it is a little bit in the beginning, but like you have such a redundancy in issues. Like I think if there's any short-term rental owners or managers listening, which I'm pretty sure there are, access. You just know going in almost all the time. I bet over 70% of your questions are going to have to do with access. And so you just know, make access really idiot proof. Don't buy complicated locks. Make sure there are, 4 fresh Duracells in that e-lock because if you're down to one, it's going to die on that guy who's been pushing the same incorrect code for the past 45 minutes and just killed your lock while you're on vacation. And now you're a little bit SOL. So I would think
Yeah.
I would think in your world, there's just a little more on the front. I'm not sure if it would rise to an Airbnb level, but because you have to get these people to get along. Like my guests don't have to get along with the guy like that is beyond the other door and the other door. They have their own kitchens, their own bathrooms, their own air conditioning controls, their own television stuff they can watch. So I really am kind of fascinated on that component of it. But it sounds like you guys do a wonderful job navigating it. I'm just envisioning some guy like naked eating cans of tuna fish with a tall, old Milwaukee, and I don't know. Like it probably doesn't happen because why would that guy want to do co-living unless he just likes to irritate people? But sounds like your mediation team can handle it.
I'll have to check with my team if we had the tall naked guy with tuna and yeah, I'll have to check if that's happened. Like a lot of stuff that we never imagined could have happened has happened for sure. I had a friend who did insurance for Uber. He's like at a certain scale, like every nightmare scenario happens, but also kind of every like dream scenario, like an Uber driver marrying their passenger, like things like that happen. But on the other edge, the stuff that I think we all know about, but I'm not going to go into, dark things and terrible things happen too. So it's just more of humanity in different ways, and it's kind of like what you talked about. Like you've got to understand how you manage your processes. You have to understand where things can break down, and you got to like kind of reinforce those pivotal moments and points. Um, because if you have a failure point that can become a negative experience for the person, then it just becomes, it starts to spiral, and then you end up doing way more work. If, for example, if your person can't get into their Airbnb because the battery dies, then suddenly you have an angry person on your hands. Instead of doing 7 messages, you do 50, right? And so now it's way more work because of the failure point. So that's something that like we've continued to evolve over time. Um, and every year there's more of those things, and that we keep learning and growing in. And so it keeps getting better and better.
That's awesome. Um, I do, I do like to do like a sample deal. I feel like we've kind of tiptoed around a couple.
Mhm.
Do you mind? So usually what I ask in the Coach Brown breakdown is, and I can repeat these, a sample deal, assuming that I have an investor guest, and I think you definitely qualify, but how you find them, how you fund them, how you fix them, and how you exit. We did talk about the one scenario and how you place your people. In the beginning, it was just you, like you said, going to Austin, building your portfolio, kind of having some of these epiphanies. But um, take us through, if you would, a sample. And again, it's finding it, funding it, fixing it, and exiting it. I can repeat that.
Yeah, so we I'll do it the way that, let's say it's homeroom managed in this one, because there's a couple ways you can get a co-living property or a homeroom property. Is you could find it yourself, you can underwrite it. But I'm just going to say how we do it,
Yeah.
because I think there's some best practices in there that could work for both sides, and I'm more familiar. So in our case, we would say, we have an investor come in and we say, this is what we do. There's more capex up front, and it's a unique model. There's some risk. But so if that's interesting to you, let's go to the next stage. The next stage is, okay, what type of investor are you? Are you like really trying to maximize your cash flow? Are you trying to get a little bit, you're trying to get in a market that's got some growth? Florida, great market for that. Or are you trying to get a market that really is like premier, and that I feel like we think Austin and Dallas kind of are there, and some Florida markets where the net migration is, it's leading the pack, and your appreciation potential, we just think is way above average. Usually in those markets, you have to pay a bit more though, because of the shortage of housing supply, and all these things, right? So we'll identify what type of investor you are, then we'll pick a market. So let's say you want a bit of both. So we're going to go to Dallas. So then our team, you'll talk to all this would have been with our investment advisors. They will then start to look for deals specifically for you that match your criteria. And then they'll start sending you deals that are underwritten. We have a tool that will kind of like do all the math. This is the down payment. This is sort of the setup and the repairs. And this is going to be your yield and we think your long-term IRR. And you'll make an offer with our partner agent. And then during the inspection period, we have our construction team will review the inspection and say, hey, we thought it would be this much to repair. It's actually going to be less, or it's actually going to be more. Additionally, now that we've done actual measurements to the bedrooms that we're going to be adding, it's going to be a little bit more or a little bit less. It goes both directions. We usually are pretty close on that second underwriting where we've actually been in the house and we're under inspection. And then once the property closes, our team will deploy the contractors. And we'll do the smart technology that enables all of it to work. And then we'll have our interior designer go in and set it up, as well as the kitchen and common areas. And then usually that construction setup phase after close will last 30 to 40 days. And then the property will be fully set up, and then we'll lease it before, like, even when it's under contract, we're starting to get leads for leasing it. One thing I think I skipped here was sort of like the way the kind of the numbers. Let's say it's a Dallas property. You're probably gonna look at something that's gonna, depending on where in Dallas you want to buy, it's probably gonna be about 300,000 to 325. We're gonna look to try to get somewhere close to the 1% rule in Dallas. That's really good in Dallas and not really possible in most single family rentals in Dallas. So we're going to try to get 3,000 in rent or something like that. So you try to get a cash yield in a Dallas market with the interest rates today in the 4 to 5% range, with an
Mm-hmm.
IRR looking long term in the 20 to 25% range. Both those numbers used to be much, much better. Like 2 years ago, they were much better. But just like everyone else, we've been compressed by interest rates. We've been compressed by the rapid appreciation. Once the property's set up, we'll lease it. And that's a period where we'll have numbers for what we think each room will rent for. Our team will go in and even look at pictures They'll compare it to other comps that we have on the platform and other rooms that other people are renting on in other platforms. And but the truth is, until you list it and actually it's available, you're not going to know how much you're going to get. So we're going to then fill the room based on demand, and we'll either increase the price or lower the price, and then it'll be stable. And that usually takes, from closing 3-ish months, but it can be way faster. Sometimes we'll have homes fully filled within like 2 weeks. Sometimes it'll be 4 to 6 months as we try to like figure out the pricing. Um, and then you'll have a property that'll perform really well. The nice thing about a co-living home is you're going to get more rent, um, you know, vast majority of the time. The other thing is that you'll have a lot more income stability because you'll be turning rooms, not whole homes. So if you lose, let's say, one or two tenants and you have 6 bedrooms, you're still getting rent from four. So that ends up being a really nice it's a kind of an evergreen performing asset, sort of like an apartment building. So that's kind of it. And then you can eventually exit. We have people that sell these homes to other um, investors who are looking for a co-living home and they like that it's already set up. Or we'll have people convert it to a single family home at some point for whatever reason, and sell it that way. So those are kind of the two ways we've seen people eventually exit. And so far, the folks that have bought with us and exited have done quite well.
No, I like that you brought up, and thank you. That was detailed. And I like that you brought up the analogy to apartments, which is I've kind of been all over the place in my career and background, but the apartments were good to me. And one of my favorite things about going multifamily, the first one that I bought of any significance was 28 units. And I had another 8 and a 3. I ended up having about 40 units relatively close to each other in Jacksonville. But this 28 was this concrete bunker, hurricane proof, 2-story, 1965 construction. That thing, I knew when I bought it at the time. Now, again, these were rosier days. This is like 2018. When I say rosier, there was still a lot of appreciation left in the market, still very low rates that ended up getting even lower. But when I bought it, I was at 50% of replacement costs, and I knew like at just about 55% occupancy, I was going to break even. And so, but to your point, if you buy, and that was a bit of a unicorn, stacked a few more unicorns down the road. But in your example, what I like is it's not like binary, like 1 or 0. It's not like this house is just, okay, I either get my $1,600 a month or I get nothing. And in addition to nothing, I need to go pay an eviction attorney and get this joker out of here. In Florida, 30 days would be fast. So in other areas,
it's pretty good for Pennsylvania.
They may just live there in other areas.
Yeah.
So yeah, might as well just deed it over. But anyways,
we learned recently in Pennsylvania that an eviction takes about 10 months, and I was like, I think we're not gonna be in Pennsylvania anymore.
Yeah,
for investors. Yeah.
But I think the diversity within, and like you can't go buy, well, not today. There might have been a time when your price point, let's just call it 300 grand, 350. That might have got you a small apartment back in the day. I mean, you might be able to go pull like a little 8-unit somewhere. Maybe, I found them. I got an 8-unit for like 222 back in the day, but those days are gone. But the point is, you almost get like the diversity benefit, like the apartment benefit, the non-binary benefit of doing this in a single family home at a price point that's attainable. And let's be honest, financing investment houses, I mean, not that like it's one of the easiest approaches. It's not like you're going out and getting like commercial underwriting for an apartment, which I think that's also attainable and reasonable. But I mean, the housing loans are the most available, so I think that's also a nice benefit. So, no, I've really enjoyed diving into this. I think we unpacked quite a few things. If somebody wanted to invest with HomeRoom, invest with you, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, livehomeroom.com, that /invest, that's kind of breaks down some sample deals. It'll kind of walk through the process. Although on this call, I've done it really in detail, so I don't know, maybe you need to read that. But yeah, and then you just reach out to us and you'll be able to self-schedule a call with one of our team members right there. You can also email me at johnny@livehomeroom.com. I'll have people email me about how to run their own rent by the room property, and I'll do my best to respond. I usually do. It's how I got started, and it's a unique incredibly fun, challenging, exciting kind of way of doing rentals. And so I like to engage with folks that are house hacking or doing something similar.
Awesome. I like to ask people, if you have something, if you had a kind of a single piece of advice for that eager entrepreneur, what would it be?
Yeah, it's really stage. It's really stage. I guess my thing is sort of like um, knowledge and experience is currency. And so, for that, and this is sort of for the first deal, because you mentioned that a lot of your folks are sort of, in the bigger pockets community. I think the first, second, and third deal are not the deals that, really get you there. It's really like you want to, each time you approach kind of your first, second, or third deal, or even further down the road, you want to work really, really hard to get the best when you can. I'm not saying not to do that, but I think maybe you'll hit a home run, but more likely to hit like a single, like no matter how much work you do, because you just don't know what you're doing. You can't like get to like expert level investing, even if you're like really focused. And so I think a lot of the learning has to come after you have a property that you own, or maybe a second, a third one. And so that time of owning a property is really the kind of the most valuable knowledge, because then you're like, okay, now I'm actually seeing some patterns. Now I can build like a strategy that's not based on like a bunch of posts that I'm reading. We see investors come in all the time. They're like, I heard I'm supposed to get 13% cash on cash and like, da, 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 da. And it's like, okay, like you got to get in and like do it to feel like the constrictions and the choices and all the complexity, and then understand how to manage and vet and all that. So action, so you can get into a point where you're actually getting experience, I think is a premium value, and something that I think is really important to over index on early. And then as you get that experience, then you can over index on cash later, is how I think about it.
No, that was a great answer. And I think that here we are in like an educational format, and I've learned a lot myself through both podcasting and receiving information through podcasts. But to your point, I can read all I want, take in all the stimulus I can on owning let's say co-living. Let's stick with your topic. But by doing it, ideally with the help and guidance of someone like yourself with homeroom, well, now I'm going to know. Here's what it's like to like go to the property, walk it. Here's what's in the inspection. Here's who's going to fix it. Here's where my tax bill goes. Here's who's going to repair my roof. Here's what the house rules are going to look like, where they're going to be posted, how we're going to manage this. You're just not going to get that experience, and you're trying to get to wisdom eventually, and you can't get to wisdom without what you say. You got to index the experiences or over index them. And so I think that's well said, and good takeaway. All right,
Yeah, I mean,
Johnny. Yeah.
you just got to get yeah. Uh, You'll be able to make great decisions. It's just really difficult early, and so you make the best you can, and then just be a sponge for learnings. I think that's the most valuable for sure. Just like
Mm-hmm.
you said.
Keep an air of humility about yourself and sponge and go. This has been great. I've appreciated your time. I know the audience has well. For all those listening, please be sure to follow, rate, and review on whatever platform you're enjoying this show. It makes a huge difference for us and allows us to bring you better and better content. If you're into socials, we're Yield Coach on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and we frequently post a bonus content, inside looks, and stuff about our personal and professional pursuits. But for now, guys, that is a wrap on this show. I'm your coach, Ian Brown, signing off and reminding everyone to lace up and leave it all on the field. Yield Coach out.